Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Boundless Authenticity Podcast. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about secret space stuff, because that's one of the things that you guys have requested to hear more about. And quite frankly, I'm very tickled by this topic as well. So I'm joined by Olivia James, who was born into the programs by a family of drug traffickers. Olivia was trauma trained in programs like MK Ultra, where her mind was split to create alters to use for missions on Earth and in space. She was used for espionage, occult, beta, and corporate programs. Olivia's main focus is finding her memories, using them to heal her alters, and hoping that her memories can assist others. So, Olivia, how's it going?
Good. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you on. I have not had anyone really talk too much about this topic before, but I know that you have a vast wealth of information on this topic that is going to probably hurt a lot of heads. So I'll just let you take it away.
It will. Okay.
Yeah. How'd I
start?
Figure this out? Yeah. How'd you figure that this was going on in the first place?
I figured it out because of a job, actually. I had gotten a new job, and the job is what triggered everything in me, because it was similar to a job I had done in the programs, and I didn't realize it. But I was getting triggers every day and extreme anxiety. I couldn't work, and I didn't know something was wrong, but something was pushing me to figure out what was wrong. I was getting like these huge amounts of information and memories, and I had no idea what it meant. And that's how I discovered, just from getting conscious recall, and I decided to start with hypnosis, hypnotic regression, to see what I could find. And it kind of blew everything open. It kind of blew my mind open to where I could get a lot of information, and kind of activated or reactivated or helped me rediscover some of the things I could do, some of the abilities I have that I wasn't fully aware that I had. I mean, I had a paranormal life the whole time I've been alive, but I just didn't know where it came from. And now that I do, it's given me lots of freedom in order to expand on all these memories and help other people, hopefully. I do want to do a disclaimer that anything I say is based on my own personal experiences and my own personal perspective. So anybody right to believe what they want to believe. Everyone has their own belief and belief systems, their own experiences, and this is my truth, and that's why I express it the way I do. It's because it's directly from me, and nobody has to, agree or disagree. It's totally your choice.
I agree with you. I want to point out as well that if someone is having a hard time listening to what you're saying, listen anyway, because that points out somewhere inside of you that maybe you need to ask some questions or figure out for yourself why it is that you don't believe that. People have their own unique individual experiences. And I'll tell you what, you're not going to get anywhere in life if you don't start trying to understand other people. Differences can bring you closer together, and they can sure as hell make you smarter. But do you mind me asking?
And I totally agree. Oh, go ahead. Sure.
I was going to ask if you mind me asking you what job it is you were doing, just so that we have some context.
I was doing something similar to a human resources type employment, working with people, things like that. It was like a human resource office work, which that'll tie in. Let me start the story so I could tie that in, because it's like, what? Okay. So I always start off, if I'm just going all the way back to saying that I had interesting parents. My father, he was from a small town, and he was recruited very young for military intelligence, the ASA, Army Security Agency, when he was about 18 years old. And he got recruited for intelligence. So he was on the German and Russian border doing code breaking. He learned German very fast. So he was doing that kind of work at a very young age. When he came out of the military, he was floundering, not knowing which way to go. And he ended up getting involved with some, we call them now cartels, but back in the 60s, they didn't have that word yet. It was almost like a crime syndicate is what they would, describe it as. So he started working with a lot of different nefarious characters, getting involved into what he became like a really major drug trafficker in the 60s and 70s. And he was bringing large amounts of heroin across the border by bus, by car, he was a pilot too. He knew how to fly a plane, but a lot of it and the busing part was my mom actually helped him do that part. She was helping him embezzle the money that they were making. So they were making quite a bit of money at a very young age. I'm talking, these are like 19, 20 years old, doing this type of work. And I was just a baby. And so they were breaking in all this money, and imagine, that kind of money and, almost like just people out of their teens, doing, I mean, I know there were different times then, but it's still kind of hard to believe sometimes, but they were doing really well. And my father got addicted to his own product. And if anybody knows anything about if you've done any research, there's a lot of research out there about the drug trade in the 60s and 70s. And there is a lot of information about how certain 3-letter agencies were involved with that. And the same thing with him. He was involved with them because he was in military intelligence, and he came out and started working like as a middleman kind of between the groups. But what was the problem is they can't, the behaviors that he was exhibiting when he was addicted was missing drops, missing meetings, not doing the same work that he was doing before. They can't have that. That's a huge risk, a huge liability to their whole, process, their program, everything that they were doing. So they tried to scare him, and to scare him straight almost. And it, obviously it didn't work. They raided him once just to let him know, hey, you need to straighten up. This isn't, you can't do this. This, you got to straighten up. And it didn't work. And then, so they ended up doing a big, huge raid. The second time they ended up, crashing through the fence, beating him up. And, he ended up getting arrested, and he was looking at life in prison, really was. And there was a big, huge public trial. I remember, seeing like pieces of some old news clippings where they were like artist renditions of him, like in the courtroom and things like that. So he went through this big, huge public trial. He had a big fancy lawyer, everything. And he was going to go to prison. And at the end of the trial, they literally just dropped everything and said, never mind, we have the wrong person. That's all they said. And then they gave him a local government job. So they gave somebody that was a known drug trafficker, heroin addict, they give him a local government job and just dropped all the charges against him. So what I found out, and, in my different ways, with recall, with remote viewing, with hypnotic regression, I was able to find out through my own father, who's dead now, that the reason why he was able to get out of his situation so easily is because he signed me over. They wanted something in return to give him his life back and not have to go to prison for life. And he signed them and let them have me. Even as a little kid, I was already signed over to them. So that meant they could use me for whatever they wanted. And I always, it was his cowardice that created this life for me. The life of trauma as a child was because of his cowardice, and he was afraid to go to prison. Or maybe he felt like he sacrificed a lot, sacrificed one to save the rest. Who knows, kind of what I'm thinking, though, is from what he tells me too, as, in his spirit form, he said it was when he was on this earth, he just was different from what he is now, because he had a different role to play, and he didn't really care about other people the way, maybe we had wanted him to. And me and him never were able to find common ground when he was alive. We always felt separate. I couldn't get that connection with him. He didn't really want to be around me and talk to me that much. And, in my sessions, I'm asking him, why'd you do that? He'd be sad because looking at me, he felt disgusted. He said it was disgusted by looking at me and what what they had created, in the MK Ultra. I was a disgusting thing for him to look at. He thought it was gross what they were doing to me. So in my mind, he knew kind of a little that it wasn't whatever they were doing to me was hurting me, but he couldn't stop it. And he kind of felt like, I don't know if it was a little bit of guilt, but he really didn't show a lot of guilt, mainly just that he didn't want to be around somebody like that, so that's why we never really found that common ground. But actually now that he's dead, we actually have a better relationship. When I see him doing my sessions or talk to him, he's almost like a spirit guide now. And he always comes to protect me and help me and, give me some guidance, which I really appreciate. We have an entirely different relationship now. So that's kind of how I got signed over. So in order to get into MK Ultra, actually this happened, I want to say it was around 6 or 7, and it's very fuzzy. And I also wanted to say, it's very difficult to create a linear timeline when there's so many missing pieces, so much different technology for memory suppression. I don't want anybody to drive themselves crazy trying to find a linear timeline. It's not always possible. It's just not. If somebody can find a linear timeline, I think that's amazing, but it's not possible for everyone. I personally don't have a linear timeline for my experiences. So, and I still would advise people, if you're looking at trying to get your memories, don't focus too much on the linear timeline if you can't get it, because that'll hold you back for a long time if you can't get it. But when I was about 6 or 7, I was taken to, and the only thing I remember is being taken in a black van with people. I didn't cry but even at that age, I didn't cry a lot. I didn't talk a lot. I wasn't very vocal, I had a kind of a different, really shy, quiet kind of kid. And they took me to a psychiatric hospital on the East Coast. And this hospital, it's no longer open anymore. So sometimes I look at pictures of it online, just because it's so weird to see it like physically. And so when I got there, there was a woman there. And it's really interesting that the programmer where I was at was a woman. And she had 2 assistants. They were what we would back in those days called orderlies or something like that. We would call them that. They're 2 males. And it was a woman, and she had white hair, and she kept her hair pinned up, like in the 70s style. She always wore these really nice flowy pantsuits. And, growing up the way I did with my parents, as, my parents lost everything. They were very poor, and we just kind of grew up I always wanted to say weird. I don't know how else to explain it. So I wasn't around the type of person that she was. I was never around those types of people, so to me, she looked very otherworldly. I kind of looked at her like, I don't know, almost ethereal, like she had this look. But it was really strange to see, because she was the one that's coordinating all of the trauma, all of the, the training for Monarch and things like that. And we had the specific space. It was only me and another boy, and his name was Jacob. So it was a very small kind of like experimental program from what I can gather. And she had, certain baseline things that she wanted to attempt. And one of them was called syncopated dissociation. She wanted us to be able to, feel that trauma at the same time. They thought there was some type of power in being able to dissociate together. Like if you can reach a certain state, they felt there was some kind of energetic, anomaly that could be created from that, So what they would do is do this almost systematic type torture. So it was almost like a kid's program where it's almost like that basic behavior modification where you can hear a bell, because we would expect, the agenda of the day to change every 15 to 20 minutes. It's expected that, there'd be some certain type of trauma, physical abuse. Then they would be nice to you for a second or change you to a different activity, maybe LSD implementation. They would do an electric shock therapy, then sexual abuse. They would train you with that. A lot of psychological and emotional abuse, which is very harmful, because, these people would, physically abuse you, and then they would treat you, like maybe give you an ice cream or something. But then they were also giving us, food filled with, filth and things like that, forcing us to try to eat that. And they wanted to break us down. They wanted to break our minds so much that it would just be empty, and then they could rebuild it into what they wanted. And I think that, they diagnose a lot of us, survivors that went through MK Ultra. They say we have dissociative identity disorder. It's extremely way more complex than that. There's so much more involved than just one diagnosis saying that you have these different personalities or alters. It's way more complex than they can even imagine. I've looked inside the mind. I've looked inside my own mind and saw there's worlds in there. There was worlds created by these alters on their own. It's very intense to see that. But they were creating, like I said, they were creating all these different alters by breaking down the mind, and they will build these pieces back up and try to program them. And a lot of it, and there was one other thing that they were doing that was really intense, is the hypnosis. She had used hypnosis on both me and Jacob in her office. We were doing our sessions with her, and she was able to find things about us that were used for the programs in terms of past lives and things like that. And that's how they saw that me and Jacob were special, is by looking at some of these past lives, not in the terms of special, more special than other people, special in the fact that they could use us. So that's the special they wanted, to be able to use us for their own agendas. So I was going to talk about a little bit about those past lives and why they were so important. And that's in this because this is the why they thought they could use me for certain things. That's why I think these past lives are so important for them to see.
I feel like you should go ahead and do that because I'm a hypnotherapist, in case you didn't know that. So sometimes when you go through people's past lives, that's how a lot of this stuff gets triggered, and they begin to describe things that don't sound like they're from any human timeline, and then you get into this kind of stuff. So I'll let you go into it because that's incredibly relevant how you got there.
Yes. And I just want to, I've used a lot of different hypnotherapists. So I've heard all the suggestions. I've heard all the statements of people saying that, well, you probably were with a hypnotherapist that guided you. No, that's not the case. All my sessions were recorded and I used about 6 different people. People think that I can't do this every time with someone different. Yes, I can. And I did. And I proved it by, recording everything and all the information I have. The first time I went under hypnosis, I had no idea I could even do this. I was under for almost 6 hours, constantly, just constant flow of information because it needed to happen. And my body and my mind knew that it needed to happen. And that's how it came through flowing, like almost like when you burst a dam and then it just all comes out. And that's what happened to me. So it gives, to me, I feel like it gives even the people completing the hypnotherapy, it gives them validation and validity in my eyes, of what they can do because I was able to reproduce that, experience every single time with something different, somebody different. It didn't matter who it was. I was able to do it each time. So some of the lives that got these people, these groups interested in me in the first place is one of the lives, it was the 1400s and I was a widow and I had 2 children. My husband had died. So I'm kind of out there by myself and I was making it. I was, doing a lot of different things. Back in those days, it was a lot different. So, it was mainly, making sure the kids had food and figuring out how to do that, living on my own. And I had I guess I would be what people would describe as a medium in those days. And so I was getting extra food by helping some of the villagers out, being able to speak with some of their loved ones who had passed over. I felt like I was really helping people. I felt great about what I was doing. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. And they would come and they would bring me vegetables and, things to eat. That's how we would barter for the service. So it was working out for me pretty well. And so the Inquisition, they came through that town and they came straight. Somebody told, about what I was doing. And they came straight to me and they came to my house and punched me in the face, beat me up, dragged me to a wagon where they took me to a dungeon and they tortured me there. They did everything they could to try to make me admit that I was, conspiring with the devil or demons or whatever they were saying. And I wouldn't. And because it wasn't true, I didn't even know what they were talking about. I was like, that's not how I lived my life. Whatever I could do, it was just something that was born in me. I didn't, acquire it. It was born within me. It was born with me, my ability. And they tried everything they could do. And I just didn't crack. And I remember being tied up to a ceiling by my arms. So I was hanging from the ceiling of the dungeon by my arms. And, a lot of it was, the different tortures. I wasn't burned at the stake or anything like that. I actually died in that life from dehydration and starvation because I wasn't eating or drinking anything. They were just doing that. And I remember my uncle who had my boys now, he brought them once just to see me before I died. And I hated that he did that because there was like a little window in the dungeon where they could look down and see me and they peeked through. And I must have looked horrible hanging from a ceiling, like naked and dirty and like, just, I don't know. I can't even imagine what kind of nightmares they had after that, but I ended up dying. And I was so angry. I was so angry at men in that life because I felt like, they did this to us and they did it to a lot of people in the village. And that kind of anger stayed with me. It was in me. And the programs felt like we can use this. This is something that they could use, that anger that was still left inside at these men for what they did to me. So that was one of the laws that they wanted to use. And especially since I had a mediumistic abilities in that life as well. There was one other life, and this one's a little controversial, but I still think it's important. And it was important for me to see myself as something other than what I am now. And I consider myself, I feel like I work hard. I try to help people. But in that life, I was something what people would consider like a victimizer or a serial killer. And it was in the 1800s, and I was a male. And I had grown up by myself. My parents had died very young, and I was a street kid. I grew up on the streets, like traveling everywhere. I traveled all over the country, and I ended up meeting another person. Like I had like a friend that he was like me. We both wanted to hurt people, and we kind of traveled together and did that. And we would harm women. We would assault them and leave them wherever we found them. And we were doing that so much. We weren't being caught because we were traveling so much. We would do that in the village and then go to the next village. And we went and did that for a really long time. And we got careless. We went to a new village, and we had assaulted a woman, right, and left her out in the field. In those days, it seemed like it had been easier for us to, complete this, evil thing. And we ended up going to a local pub, and we were kind of like drinking with some of the villagers, and somebody found her, and they automatically knew it was us because there was no one else knew in the village. It was us. They knew. And we ran. We thought we could get away. We ended up finding like an abandoned barn, and we were hiding in there. They knew we were in there. And instead of letting us out to, beat us up, they locked it and set it on fire. And I remember in that life just trying to crawl up the walls and get up into the rafters, to get away from the heat. And we ended up dying like that, rightfully so, for what the crimes we were committing. We needed to be, over in that life. So that was another life where they saw that they could use that, not just against me, but for other missions against other people. They knew that they could use that, of who I had been before. So that was, and there was also another life. And this one was really interesting. I thought this was coming from my very first session I ever did. And I saw myself, and it looked like could have been something like ancient Egypt, something like that. And I was a male then too. And there was thousands of us just walking, all of us people just walking and walking. And none of us really made eye contact. We didn't talk to each other, nothing like that. We were all walking around like, what I would consider like automatons, or like robotically, just kept going. And if I looked very far in the distance, if I looked at one of the pyramids, there was a being standing on top of the pyramid, and it looked like a giant dog. And we called them the dog people. We had a myth in our village that said that the dog people came down and killed our god, and that our god had been a crocodile. And we said that the dog people came down and killed him, and they had taken control, and they were pushing us to do all this. And let me tell you, these beings were so strong in whatever technology and whatever abilities they had. It only took one of them to command thousands to continue walking and working. And they would make us work until we died. So you would just keep walking and moving sand. They were building something called flash portals, and they wanted it done quickly. So they had us moving constantly moving and building and moving sand until you just died. And most of us would just die wherever we fell down. And I actually just lay down on the steps and died. And that's where the last I sat. What I thought was interesting is when I was trying to scan the body of this dog person, I saw that in the inside of it, right around the solar plexus area, there was like this huge glob of black worms that was actually, the dog person was a host for this kind of like, I don't know, some type of extraterrestrial type sentient thing. I don't even know what it was, but I remember seeing it. So I thought it was interesting that this dog person was commanding us, and he thought he was in control, but something was in control of him. And he was very forward and aggressive with me. Like he could, which is interesting that when you're under hypnosis, or if you're in the deepest trance you can go, which I was, that the time dropped away. There was no time. I was there. I could interact with this thing. And it almost like it stepped through a portal almost and spoke to me. And the only thing it said was, get back to work. This interdimensional type being stepped through, and instead of giving some really cool greeting like you would expect, it said, get back to work, and showed me its staff and said, get back to work. And that was it. So I remember being in that life that as a slave, I knew my lesson kind of was that I knew what it was to be completely controlled. And in the eyes of these programmers, that was perfect for them to see that I could be someone that could be completely controlled based on that life, that they knew that they could go down that road with me. And the other life that I thought was really important, that they thought was important too, is that, when I'm looking at myself, I can't really see myself because I'm kind of like invisible. I'm like a red energy. And this was in ancient times. And I remember I was following somebody in a desert. They can't see me, but I can see them. And I'm like, playing around games with them, walking up behind them, trying to whisper at them and, almost like teasing them. I almost felt like it was so fun to do this, and this person was terrified. He was out looking for one of the flock, his flock, one of the sheep had gotten away from it. And he was trying to find it before it got too dark. And he was terrified that I was following him in the desert and he could hear me. He knew there was something wrong and he was like terrified. And I thought it was funny. I thought it was so fun because that's kind of the life I lived. And back in those days, I would be considered what people would call a dark jinn. So some people say dark entity. Some people have all these different ideas of what they think that those people were. All I know is that we were a race of beings and that we had our own lives. We had our own hierarchy in terms of who was on top, who was, we have a respect thing. You're supposed to show respect to your elders and things like that. So I guess we would consider, and this is what the jinn says. I'm not saying that I believe this. Her name was Harlowin. I was named Harlowin then. She says she was something of a trickster god. So she says that's what the jinn were, tricksters. So I necessarily don't call myself that, but she does. So that was her whole life. And she didn't know she was evil. She even said that. She's like, I didn't know I was evil then because I chose this role and I came down here to help people. And we kind of asked her, who do you think you're helping by doing evil things? And, and she said, they wanted an experience of darkness and I brought it to them. She said, that was the role I chose, is to bring that to these people. And they called me. And she really does think that they call her. And they did, almost in a way. Some of them did. Some of it was the Harlowin, the jinn. She would start that process of oppression, though. And, trying to tear them down little by little, scaring them and, doing things and, just to oppress them enough to where they would eventually just let her take over. And it happened a lot. The person would just give up and just say, go ahead. And, they let her in and she would take over. And once she would take over, she would, do her process of trying to destroy their lives however she can, either make them hurt themselves, other people, just totally obliterate their lives. And that was the role she plays. That was the role she chose in that time period. And then she went on to do something else, just like I'm here now. We went on to do something else. And I can't really apologize for it because I can't eliminate any of the past lives. If anybody knows how to do that, you can tell me, but I don't feel bad for that. It's not me now. All of these things are part of me still. And that's why I know about it. And to me, it stays at the cellular level. From what I've learned through hypnosis is that a lot of these lives and these abilities stay at the cellular level, sometimes even in the spine. What I've learned, some of it is resting in the spine. It's so interesting to even see that. And I also learned that a lot of psychic abilities come from the stomach. We wouldn't expect that because, we think a lot of it is built in the mind. I had no idea that some of the abilities that I have were initiate in the stomach. So that was really interesting. So those were some of the lives that were very important to those secret groups that were trying to get control. There's a lot of warring factions, and that's what they're trying to do. So they thought they could use us for different programs. And I've found a lot of different past lives that I've wrote about in my books and things like that I thought were interesting. But I think those were the most important that they wanted to use. They knew they could use me being what used to be a dark entity. That was important to them. They had all these groups that they could, use me for. So the programmer, who I call Mrs. W, the woman with the white hair, she ended up sending me out. She did almost like a referral program and what I call special sector. I was from a special sector, and that says that in my file that I'm from special sector. So she sent me out to another person to be evaluated. And when I got to this man's office, I was there and he was there with two other people. And they were sitting on a little couch, and it didn't look like a hospital. It looked more like a psychiatrist's office. They had like really neutral looking furniture, things like that. And I was just sitting there And there was this couple there, and they looked like they may have been twins. They were very light skinned, maybe had an albino condition. I'm not quite sure. But the man, when I saw him, his name was Dr. Green, and he was very elderly, maybe like in his 90s. I couldn't even tell. Very frail at that time. He was wearing little glasses and very much losing almost all of his hair. He was very skinny at that time. And I'm not quite sure, but a lot of people say that Dr. Green is another name for Mengele. I'm not quite sure if that's real or not, because I only know him as Dr. Green, and I do remember what he looks like, and he was very old at that time. But he instructed these two people to do an exam on me. And they were doing kind of this weird thing where they asking me, they were looking in my eyes and my ears, in my, different places. And then they told me to open my mouth and say, ah. And they both looked inside my mouth, they're trying to look in my throat. And then they told Dr. Green, they said, yes. They said, we found it. We can see the thing inside her. And so they took me into this program called Project Traveler. And it's tied to the occult. It's an occult program that they wanted to experiment with. They were trying to make some of these, I don't know, like paranormal, supernatural, and occult ideologies, or they wanted to make it measurable. They wanted to see if it had real energy output, things like that. So that's when Dr. Green started to, use me for Project Traveler. So they were wrong, though, because they thought I was possessed. They thought that I had an attachment, and they were looking for other possessed people to see if they could kind of like harness that energy and that power, because they thought there was power behind the dark side, and they wanted to see what they could utilize it for. So when I got back to the psychiatric hospital, they did some experiments, and they saw that I could go into these deep trances and let, different things take over my body, since they thought I was already possessed. The reason they were wrong is because I wasn't possessed. It was just what I was. They saw Harlow in that jinn part of me. They thought that they could take it out. They can't. It was just who I was in my being. I was just that thing. So they had one episode where they were doing they had me in this room, and they were trying to do sensory deprivation, and they didn't use water or anything. They just sat me in a chair in a dark room, and they put blindfold over my eyes, and then they hooked me up to an IV, and that went on for days. And they gave me no food, no water, just the IV, no, contact. They didn't speak to me, anything. They just had me let things, build up inside me. And I let that open up. And that's when I first learned I could do that. It's called spirit hosting. And actually, it was a darker entity that told me that's what I was. They said, you're a spirit host. And it's being able to open yourself up and letting this, letting this thing take over you. You fully body, mind, and spirit. I go into like a very relaxed kind of place, and I don't get harmed by it, physically, psychologically, or emotionally. And that's why it's an ability, because it can come and it can go, and I don't get harmed by it in any way, which for them, it really is an ability, because most people can't, have a demon speak through them and be normal after that. I can. So they were using that, and they were measuring things. Like they would have me let something possess me, and then they would make a measurement of it. They would do body systems checks, like, blood pressure and, something similar to what they would do in a hospital to check your levels and things like that, just to see if there was any type of energetic output at all. They were trying to make measurements. So that I thought that was really interesting that they did that for a long time. And I was really conflicted, because they weren't giving me any food or anything. They were pretty much torturing me. And my whole life, even now people are saying, you can't trust, demons and entities, but the humans were torturing me constantly. And it was the demonic entities flowing in and out of my body that kept me alive. They were the ones sustaining me while these other humans were torturing me. So as a child, you can find that very conflicting, like who are you supposed to trust? I'm supposed to be afraid and terrified of this group of, beings that no one can see, but then it's the humans that are physically and emotionally torturing me. That was really, really very conflicting. And I think it's probably affected, some of the work I do now, that I'm able to open it up to everything and let everything have a chance to speak, and then make no judgment on that. I just let it be neutral, what it is. And then, I don't want to even make a judgment on what anything says or does. It's just different for me now. So we did that for a while. And like I said, me and Jacob ended up, they considered us what they called prize pupils. That means we took to the abuse very well. We were able to do what they wanted to them, what they wanted us to do, and to be able to extreme dissociation. And we were able to do that. We could leave our bodies to escape the pain. And that was actually the only time that we could be children, is when we were left our bodies, because they wouldn't let us play together or anything normally. It was always something to do with pain and suffering. So for us to be able to just dissociate and be able to have that time, that was what we had as children. That's it, until we left that program. And I mean, other things after that, there was a few things that happened in terms of like, they did like monarch training. I really don't talk about it too much, you know, the sexual part of what they were trying to train us for. And they really couldn't use me a lot until I got older, because they had a specific plan in mind for what they wanted me to do. But they did, right when I was around 13, they had me doing additional training. And the training was for what they wanted me to be is a personality profile when I got older. So they had a man chaperone me. And I remember the man, he was dressed really nicely in a suit. He had a nice little hat on, you know, and he was almost like a chaperone. And he really didn't talk to me or say anything. I just knew I had to go with him. I don't ask questions. That's how I was trained in MK Ultra. You know, we're so extreme mind control. You're trained not to ask questions. You're trained to do exactly what you're told and always complete missions, you know, things like that. So he took me on a train. And at the end of the train ride, we weren't on Earth anymore. We were actually on the moon and to level 4 underground. And level 4 underground is where they were conducting psionics training. And the class that I was going to, it was more for adults. And the instructor there, she was kind of a younger person. Everybody looked younger than they were. And I don't know why. Being on another planet, I'm not quite sure. Everybody always looked younger than they were. And so she didn't really want to deal with the kid. That wasn't her role, but they said she had to take me because I was from special sector. So there was no turning it down. So, and she was very assertive and, you know, kind of like dominating with me in terms of my tutelage and what she was trying to teach me. She wasn't very soft with me, but I can appreciate it now because I feel like she was trying to keep me alive based on how, you know, kind of strong she was with her teachings. And there was other people in the classroom. There was other adults, and I'm not quite sure what they can do with their abilities. There was some kind of like telepaths, you know, animal communicators, things like that. I don't know if they were just experimenting or what with them, but mine was the ability they wanted me to have was actually going to be used in different espionage tactics and corporate espionage, things like that. So she worked really hard with me. She taught me really well. And I always remember this one phrase she told me because she was trying to keep me alive. She said, you have to be this quick. It has to be one look and one word. And you have to know what these people are thinking. You have to know what they're about. She's saying, like, when I get into a situation, I have to know immediately what these people are about to keep myself alive. So she was very serious about that and for me to learn that technique. And once I got done with the training, I wasn't used to it. From what I can remember, I wasn't really used a lot until I was about 19 because of my physical appearance. I looked so much younger than I was. They needed my, you know, kind of like my physical appearance to mature in a way for what they wanted me to do. And they wanted me to do a lot of beta work to start with and a lot of corporate espionage. And to me, that's the most dangerous stuff, the corporate espionage. It was so dangerous. It was so scary. The beta work, they wanted me to, it's almost kind of like considered like a Black Widow program. They want you to infiltrate someone's life. You're given a target, which we call a mark. You infiltrate that person's life. You monitor, you gather intelligence. And one of my alters actually has a photographic memory. I don't particularly, Olivia doesn't have a photographic memory, but one of my alter does. So all I have to do is be around someone and that part of my mind is constantly recording whatever's going on. And once you're in a relationship with somebody or a fake relationship, you're able to gather that information quite quickly because they begin to trust you and they just start speaking about whatever's going on in their lives. And that's what we would do. We would record the information and we were debriefed by hypnosis. So they would have to go deep in our mind to get that information that was kind of locked away from these missions. So that was the beta work that they wanted us to do. And there were other, what I call outcomes. I don't want to go into too much detail, but you can kind of guess what kind of stuff, would be an end to some of those relationships. Sometimes you would just leave the relationship like they told you to after you gathered the intelligence, or they would expect some other type of outcome. That's what they called it. So once I got done doing with that, I ended up doing that for a while, and I got a promotion. And because they said for a job well done, and I think I was around 29, and I ended up going to Mars for a short time, about 10 extra years. And when I was there, I was on the McCreary base, and McCreary base is located in the South Canal region of that planet. And the general that I worked under, his name was General Asher. I was specifically taken into the corporate sector. So I wasn't like in a big military mission. We were on the military base, and I worked near a loading dock, but I wasn't taking part of those big military operations. I was the human resources. So any new recruits coming into the base, they would come see me in my office, and I would use some of my abilities. I kind of consider it like a mild telepathy. Sometimes we call it energy reading, things like that. But I would have them talk. I had like a battery of questions I would ask them. Just to get them talking is how I read them. Just as soon as they're talking, it's almost like reading between the lines of everything they say in order to get a proper assessment of who I think they are and what job I might think they might do well in. And I didn't really work with a lot of super soldiers. They were in special sector. I wasn't necessarily working for special sector. I was just working for the basic, new recruits coming in. And back in the days, back in the time that I was in MK Ultra and things like that, they were still utilizing like my lab, like military abduction, to get some of their recruits. And nowadays, like when I was still on the base, like in the early 2000s, they were getting voluntary recruits. So there were people coming straight out of the military telling, their family that they're going overseas or something, and they were going up to Mars for a small tour. And they were thinking they were going to be like Starship Troopers fighting aliens and things like that. And then when they got in my office, they found out they'd be working like, regular jobs. Like we had an entertainment division, there was mining, there was resources, water treatment, waste treatment, all that. And they would probably get a job doing that. So their dreams of being in some type of like movie did not come true on that base, because anybody, a super soldier, would be going straight to special sector. If somebody did come in my office and I felt it using my abilities that they had some type of special ability themselves, they would definitely be referred out. I would have to send that recommendation up to General Asher so he could figure out, what office they needed to be at. So I did that for a long time on Mars, and it was really lonely. Like I remember feeling not well the whole time that I was there. And there was a lot of isolation. I wasn't able to form connections with people, especially working for the corporate sector. Nobody wanted to be around me. I was, it's almost like working for the man. So nobody wanted to interact with me, especially some of the other soldiers. I just didn't have a good, reputation. Also, part of the job was to ensure that I made sure I told the upper management if there was anybody that came into my office that I thought would challenge the status quo. They took that very seriously. You're not allowed to have your own opinion on anything. You have to follow exactly what they wanted you to. All the rules, everything. So I felt like I was kind of depressed. If I'm guessing what was wrong with me on Mars the whole time I was there is that I felt like I had depression. And we didn't have a word for depression. So I didn't know what was wrong with me. And also I was starting to have kind of bleed through memories of just another life. And I felt like something was wrong with me on Mars. I knew something was wrong with me and I couldn't figure out what it was. I was doing things like I wasn't doing the same job like I should have been, and able to, do my job correctly. I had broken into the general's office and was looking through his files. I don't even know what I was looking for, but I had no other ideas of what to do and how to solve this issue for myself. So I was everywhere looking, and I ended up getting demoted because I wasn't doing the same job anymore. And I ended up working, the rest of the time there. I worked on a medical satellite station for a little bit that's near Saturn. And what they do on there, they're just doing augments and different type of surgeries. I was somebody that would come in the room before they completed the surgery or some type of medical training, something. And I would just almost like a medical social worker, when I have them sign all the forms, because they take consent very seriously in those programs. There's people's signatures everywhere. I know that because I would have people sign things, especially when you leave, when you're retired, you sign a lot of forms. And one of the forms you sign, you agree to be controlled and monitored for the rest of your life, no matter what. There's people, I have my own signatures on that stuff, and I know other people have signatures on there. And I'm not saying that it's right and that we had full ability to say that and give consent, because we didn't, because we were almost like modern day slavery. You're not allowed to say anything back. But they say that those forms, because of the way they're worded in terms of legal language, that they'll hold up in all courts, including galactic courts. That's what they say. Anyways, that those forms up there held up and everything in case anybody tried to take them to court. Well, look, you signed for this. You said we could do this. You said you even assigned to be terminated if you don't complete the task to their whatever they think is the best. You agreed to that. You signed it saying, okay, I agree to be terminated. And terminated doesn't mean losing a job. Just, they mean something else when they say that. So the legal language is really important, what they're using. So that's what I did up until I ended up leaving in terms of retirement. And retirement for us, from what I remember, it was a chemical retirement. And then they re-age you, they age regress you. And they put you back in your crappy life. And that's what happened to me. I got age regressed to the time that they took me at. And I went back to my crappy life. And that's where that kind of experience came from.
Wow. There's so many questions that I could ask you, but I feel like we need to do a second part, because a lot of it is just going to be and
there's so much more. Yeah, there's so much more to go into. I do have a fun story, though, I was going to add, because I always like talking about it because it was so interesting. When I was on Mars, and like I said, I had no friends. Everybody hated me. Nobody really wanted to be around me. I wasn't really that girl. And they were doing these exhibitions because, like I said, they have an entertainment division because there's nothing else to do. So people would pack it, some of the civilians and even some of the soldiers and everybody, they would pack in the arenas, on the weekends or whatever. And there would be these exhibitions. It's almost like modern gladiator or UFC type stuff. So they had a lot of the girls, they would have us dress up like in dresses, cute little outfits, and they want you to sword fight to the death. And so I volunteered once because they said that if you volunteer, I thought I volunteered, people will have a different idea who they think I am. I might get a little bit of favor with people and people not treat me like crap. So I ended up doing that quite a few times, and they give you a gift afterward, like a reward if you win. Like either some of the other girls, they are asking for like clothes and jewelry, which means nothing. It means nothing on that planet. Nothing, no material stuff means anything there. So I asked for food. I wanted good food. And I asked for something like a steak and a potato or something. That was my gift I wanted. And I remember I lost like 3 times, but then I won like 2 times. And I don't remember when I lost, how I ended up alive and back in my bed the next day. I have no idea how that happened. I just remember having my throat slit from a sword, and then I'd be okay the next day. And then my food would be sitting next to me. So I did that. I literally risked my life for a plate of food. And it was like nothing. Maybe I didn't really care that much because of my depression on Mars, that I was just like, well, if it happens, it happens. And, I went through life, whatever. I thought that was interesting, though, that they have like girls sword fighting to the death. Imagine, you're watching that on the weekend. They're having people sword fight to the death. It was really interesting. And there was so much other stuff going on, like on Mars. What I thought was interesting is that, in personality profiling, the people that are at the highest levels, they're sociopaths and psychopaths. They're recruiting specifically people that are diagnosed as sociopaths because they feel like those people make the best leaders because they can make the hard decisions. Like if there's a war, they'll probably win the war based on how they behave. But that's also dangerous for a lot of us that are working around them. We're literally working amongst sociopaths and psychopaths every day, like in the office. People that I worked with, they're sociopaths and psychopaths, and you're risking your life sometimes. And sometimes they would try to do things, and what I thought was interesting is you're not allowed to fight back in a couple of different groups. Like when I worked for a mercenary group called Kruger, they're allowed to harm you. Your coworkers that are males are allowed to harm you You can't fight back. You can't complain. You can't question. Same thing on Mars. I didn't have that feeling that I could say anything. And, sometimes something would happen and you can't say anything about it. You just have to let it go. So definitely a weird imbalance there. And I think it's really interesting that people think they have an idea about women, but the things I've seen women do, both good and bad, in these programs would blow anybody's mind. It would totally blow away what people think that we are. And they don't have any idea. Nobody has any idea what women are capable of in any way because of the things I've seen that people could do. It's really crazy to see, even for myself, being who I am now and what I used to be able to do. And then now I'm here and I have to pretend all the time like I'm a weak little girl. It's really weird to even have that life and try to pretend to be a normal life when you were able to do things, and it wasn't even a different life, So it's really strange.
Yeah. Do you think that that's just how this planet is set up, though, to keep women in a particular, atmosphere where they really can't do much of anything?
I think all of it. I think the same thing for men, though. They're probably put into a specific position where we're all kind of locked into this box in terms of what people over us and how they want us to behave. And I know it's not real because I've seen people do things. It's just I can't buy into it just because I've been able to see it myself firsthand what people are capable of.
I believe you because, even just to referencing some of my own past life experiences, I feel as though maybe this planet is just set up in a way that humans in general are extremely limited in their capacity for a reason,
Yeah. And I get it in a way. Like, imagine if I was able to harness the power I had when I was a djinn. And if I could do that now, I guess they have to kind of close it off. They're like, you can't have everything. What kind of person would I be if I was able to harness that,
Uh-huh.
And I did want to say, like, I thought it was interesting when I was speaking to Harlowin. She told me kind of about how, because we think that the demonic entities, they are able to just come physically. And, I don't see a lot of them coming physically ever because it's very difficult to create that physical form. And also, they don't like the reaction they get when they come in their physical form because they in their minds, these demonic entities think they're gods. They do. They say they're gods. I'm not saying I believe that. They believe that. They think they're gods because they've been worshipped as gods for thousands of years since ancient times. And that if they come here and if one of their followers calls them, they call it a heart call. And then when somebody calls them, because you do have to let them in order for them to invade your space. So when they try to come physically to a follower and the follower doesn't have a good response because they're not coming looking like some angelic being, they're coming in their true forms, and then a person sees that and they get a disgusted look and scared and fear. That's not the reaction they want. They feel like they're gods. So they don't always come as physical. They like to travel as energy. And specifically, we travel by the blood. So a lot of entities would travel by the bloodstream. That's why and I always called myself red energy. That's how I saw myself. And I would travel by the blood and get inside the bloodstream. So it's different from the stuff I've seen is kind of different from what obviously we've seen in movies and things like that, where, physical entities, these entities are just coming through physically. They're traveling as energy and through the bloodstream sometimes.
Yeah. Well, back to that whole idea about limited abilities, it's kind of like the Superman thing, don't you think? Where it's like, come to this planet, all of a sudden you have powers because there's a yellow sun, and then on your own home planet you're useless. So yeah. I wonder if
I felt that. Like I think maybe a lot of women, we feel like that if you were in the programs because you had abilities, and now I'm here and I have to just be a normal person. It's just, it's really conflicting for me. It's like really weird, I still get amazed. Yeah, I still get amazed when recording myself doing the things that I'm doing, especially with spirit hosting. I'm doing astral travel, remote viewing, remote influencing. That's all difficult stuff. That's not very easy stuff for the normal person to do. And to see myself doing it is like, it always mind blows me every time. I'm like, I wake, I come out of the trance and be like, I can't believe I just said that, stuff I'm saying for like hours on end, a constant flow of information. It's very interesting for me to see that and be able to reproduce it over and over, the same process.
I totally get that. So how often are you continuing to do sessions and stuff to uncover what else is in there?
I think I started, I want to say 2020, maybe. I started doing it in 2020. It's about 5 years now. And now I've kind of slowed down a little bit. I'll do it because now it's getting a little bit risky. Because I've started to use the abilities. I think I started about a year or two ago to break into, secret documents and bases and other people's bases and things to try to get information for the world. It's risky. And they've kind of caught on to that, especially with Project Oblivion coming out. They said, there's no more of this. You guys can't keep doing this stuff. So the last time couple times I had a session, I had a counter remote viewing team from other agencies kind of infiltrate my session to see what I'm doing. It's like when I'm closing my eyes, I automatically see a set of eyes. That means somebody's looking at me while I'm doing this. So I'm starting to see that where they're kind of caught on that I'm kind of sneaking into places. And I always say, like, I'm just a girl. I'm not a professional. There's people out there on YouTube that are professional remote viewers and they're got coordinates and stuff. I don't do that. It's just a natural ability. So I don't follow that. It just comes to me. Like I always say that it comes in a whoosh because it does. Whatever I'm connected to at the highest level of my being starts and guides me to where I need to go and has allowed me to do this. I'm not being stopped by anything except for these new groups are trying to, and it's not working. But I got a feeling they're going to continue. So I've met a couple of, I say met, but actually they're intruders. So I've met a couple of groups, and the last couple of sessions I had some that I think one of them wanted to harm me. And so I kind of stepped back a little. I'm only doing it like every few months now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have heard similar things from other people. And I was wondering if during your hypnosis sessions, if you've ever hit anything like a government cap or anything like that, where it was extremely difficult to get to a certain level of information.
Yes, quite a few times. To the base in Australia. Pine Gap? Yeah. As soon as I got close to that base, I saw this huge eye. Huge. They have very serious monitoring with their remote viewers. They have a really strong remote viewing system, remote viewing for their people. I felt like they already saw me coming before, and I literally felt myself flying through the air trying to get to their base, and once I got inside, it's a lockdown in there. Like it's locked down. I couldn't even get into the room, and with my spirit energy, I couldn't even get in the room. I saw these red lights, red numbers over the door. So I had to go fall through the floor and then come up in the middle. And when I got inside that side of the base, I wanted information. That's what I came for. I'm risking my life to get this information, so I'm going to get it. So I used remote influencing, and I don't feel bad about this. I know some people get mad at me when I say I do this remote influencing. People need to remember these people are kidnapping and abusing children for our whole lives. Do I feel bad about kind of forcing them to give me information? No, I'm sorry, I don't. So I found one person that was kind of like unfocused. I needed to do remote influence. I have to find somebody that's not totally focused. So there was a girl there and she was kind of off focus thinking about her boyfriend and things like that. So put my spirit hands on her shoulder and kind of like got inside of her. So I'm using her body almost like a possession. I'm using her. So I start making her type, and she starts typing things. I'm trying to get information about projects. And there was one that came up like Project Stranger. And so when I'm in there, I'm only in there for a few seconds. It's not even very long, maybe a minute at the most. And this big, huge message, flashes on the screen of her computer, and it said break screen. She kind of like freaked out, and she like pushed herself back up from the desk and like jumped up. And as soon as she jumped up, I was kind of like flown back out of her body. Like they immediately knew that I was there somehow. I don't know how that they could figure out she was being remote influenced. Maybe the information she was reaching, they said break screen, which means everything stop. So that was one time that, I felt like it was still successful because I was practicing, but that's the kind of stuff I've been trying to do. And I've gotten quite a bit of information in terms of like documents and some of the legal language on documents I'm able to find. Looking at my own, I was able to get my own service number, a lot of information about my service record and, things like that. So it's really interesting. There's a lot of information out there. It's just, nobody's looking for it. I'm like the only person trying to do this that is like known. Obviously there's other secret groups trying this, but
I think they have some kind of energetic frequency monitoring system where they can tell who it is at any time. Like you would think that people, like, I guess a person with just an average way of thinking would not be going as far as to think that way. They would think, okay, I'm an invisible spirit, so I can't be detected, but I don't think that people get that you as an individual, you have this energetic footprint that follows you throughout all of your past lives, right? So that's how they're able to.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I did see one time where I broke into my own handler's house because there's the handler divisions. They call it the aftercare program. Everybody who is in MK Ultra, you sign forms to be monitored by the aftercare program, and they hide behind insurance companies as their front. I broke into my own handler's house using, remote viewing. I use astral travel by location, and spirit hosting to do all this, and telepathy I was using that day. I brought everything I could do because I'm like, this was serious. I need to meet this handler of mine. And he was a total dick. And so I broke into his house, and I want people to know I didn't break into it physically. I used my spirit body, just so they know I didn't break into it physically. I broke in using my spirit body. So I found him, and he lived out, I think, in Rhode Island, something like that. And so I was in his house, and he had his office in his house. And these handlers, they're not scary. I want people to think, don't be afraid of these people. These are a bunch of nerds sitting at a desk behind a chair. They use a computer and a headset to torture us. These are not scary people. There's nothing to be afraid of. And so he was there, and I came up behind him, and just like the girl, I tried to put my hands on his shoulder just because I wanted to know. And this dude, he has abilities. He knew he could feel me. He knew what I was doing. So he starts typing on his computer because he wanted to see what I was typing. And immediately he said that acid is combative and that I was presenting with ill intentions, and that he wrote that measures would need to be taken and that it would be spleen and tremors. That was the button he was going to push, and the recommendation he had to, because, they target our health, everything. So they're using all their machinery, every technology they have. And they said that's what it was going to happen to me for trying this. And what I thought was interesting is that this was early on in my remote viewing sessions, that I saw a ghost, in the back of his room, and it was his grandmother. And she could see me, which I thought that was interesting, is that I was using the ghost dimension. I didn't even know I could do that. Me and her could see each other, me and the ghost. He couldn't see either one of us, but we could see each other. And I was presenting as a remote viewer. So people, if you ever see a shadow person, sometimes those are remote viewers. Those aren't always spirits and ghosts. Sometimes those are remote viewers. That's really interesting. I was presenting as like a shadow person, and she saw me, and this guy knew. And we kind of went back and forth arguing kind of thing for a while, and he just said, pretty much, get out, stop bothering me, you effing loser, kind of thing, like just, went off on me kind of thing. So,
yeah.
And I do that a lot. I get that a lot. When we start getting into where we're talking to like the handler division, they're very abusive in their language because they don't want you to know who they are. They can't believe they said, how did you figure this out? How did you figure it out? I'll just say, I don't know. I don't know. I just figured it out. So it's surprising to a lot of them when I'm able to do this kind of thing. I'm like, you're the one that trained me. So maybe you should be asking yourselves why I'm able to do this.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we'll have to do this again because there's more things that I could ask you about, Project Traveler and the spirit hosting.
Oh, there's tons.
All that stuff. So we'll have to do several.
There's so much info. Episodes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for being on Boundless Authenticity podcast. If you want, you can tell everyone where they can find your books and where they can find you if they want to talk to you, etc.
Yeah. So I have 2 self-published books. They're on Amazon. The first one is called Gray Mouse, Sex, Space, and Mind Control. And the second book is called Gray Mouse Purgatory, which that one's my favorite. I have 2 blogs where I put all my articles about my experiences on, weekly. I have one on Substack and one on Medium. I'm on TikTok, Twitter X, Facebook, Instagram, all the different spaces. You can message me there or you can reach me by email. I put all my emails on my socials too, in case you have a direct question.
All right, great. Olivia, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
You're listening to the Boundless Authenticity Podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness.
At the very least, people need to understand that the United States builds bunkers, which are basically cities underground, every 3 months.
Basically, when you dream, you tap into your subconscious. It is your nocturnal intuition, your creativity and imagination unchained from conscious reason, ego and logic.
They're biologically alive, but they have no soul. They have AI consciousness. They can alter your conscious of the brain to get the brain.
We live in a multidimensional reality, whether it comes through esoteric information in the spiritual realms or the UFO people, experiencers, or mainstream through quantum physics and through mainstream science now realizing that parallel dimensions probably exist.
We're all spiritual beings. We're all having these human experiences. We've heard that phrase over and over and over. But what does that really mean?
All the big questions of life, we have these answers inside of our souls.
We're ultimately studying the nature of what it is to be human, good and evil, our psychology, how we think, and our health. That's why I love Bruce Lee's great quote, all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge.